Jennifer Lawless down at American University giving us the take inside the Beltway. Jennifer, how are you today?
Great, how are you?
I am doing well. I'm doing well. I happen to know this is an anniversary of sorts. When folks talk about Jennifer Lawless, we can go back 11 years to the day in 2006 when you had run for Congress. Can you imagine, did you know this is where you'd be 11 years later, down at American, running the Women in Politics Institute down there?
No, I thought I was going to stay in Rhode Island forever. And so, although I obviously miss it a lot, the last 11 years have certainly been pretty fulfilling. It's remarkable to me that it's been that long because, as I mentioned, I haven't gotten any older, so I don't really know how the time passed.
Funny, I haven't either. It's '06 seems just like yesterday. You know, you're always doing the research about who runs for office, especially women running for office. You know, again, it's 11 years, but what would you say to women who might have political aspirations?
Well, not much has changed in the last decade. Women remain severely underrepresented in our U.S. political institutions. The good news is that, as was the case in 2006 and even in 1996 and 1986, when women run for office, they're just as likely as men to win their races, and they're able to raise just as much money. So I'd encourage anybody who's thinking about it to consider throwing their hats into the ring.
Okay, 11-year anniversary. Let's go to what's happening that we're seeing on the news. Obviously, it's been all hurricanes all the time. Between Harvey, between Irma, obviously it's now the aftermath down in Florida. What's the talk down there in terms, again, of how much the federal government's going to have to come to the aid of these states?
Well, I think the general consensus is that there's really not much of a question. The federal government is going to have to step in and do whatever the states and the localities can't do for two reasons. First, it's the right thing to do. Second, because the devastation is so obvious. I mean, with social media and technology that we have right now, there's no getting around the fact that there are major areas of devastation. And it's not the case that people just have to look at the front page of their newspaper the next day to see one town or locality. So a federal government that wouldn't be willing to work really hard and fund a cleanup and rebuilding just looks like a federal government that's not only out of touch, but also cruel.
So, because so much national attention, international attention was paid over the few days, especially with Irma approaching Florida, you know, what's the talk down there when there's so much else going on, but clearly this is something that's going to really capture national attention? I mean, A, was the coverage of it warranted by lieu of the fact of the size and severity of the storm? And then B, what did we miss?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I've heard several people say things like this would have been a perfect opportunity for Donald Trump to ram a lot of stuff down people's throats because they wouldn't know. I mean, if you were looking at CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or any of the local affiliates, all you saw was news coverage of first Harvey and then Irma all the time. It's not to say there was no partisanship. I mean, I watched several panels on CNN where you had meteorologists basically fighting about the path of the storm. So, you know, it was just a different debate, different deliberations, different experts on both sides, but the same narrative was still pretty much there. But really, everybody did kind of take a break from what was going on. And so attention hasn't been focused as much on the FBI's investigation, on what's going on with Russia, on a series of other domestic policies. But my sense is that today, and certainly in the coming days, we're going to return to that because the storm is on its way out.
Well, here's hoping it's, you know, September 12th. There's still a little more time in the hurricane season. I'm not sure how much more the country can take. Here's hoping we can tap back to pay attention to sort of local and national politics. What are we hearing with the Russian investigation?
Well, we're hearing that Bob Mueller is continuing to move quite quickly, and now he's also interested in interviewing top White House staffers. So any sense that this is going to be relegated to just what was going on during the campaign is no longer a narrative that the White House can continue to push. People in the White House who are very, very close to Trump are now in a position where they have to turn over documents and answer questions. So my sense is that we're going to continue to see more information about what it is specifically that they're seeking, but also probably develop a better timeline as to when and if Donald Trump himself will be questioned.
And what do we expect? I mean, all of these folks who are going to be getting subpoenaed have lawyers. Obviously, they have to go before folks questioning them. Clearly, I mean, I can't imagine anyone's going to fall on this sword. I have to imagine the legal counsel is, you better tell the truth.
I think that's right. It's also unclear that anybody could fall on the sword because there's so much in writing. right? And there are so many emails and so many documents that suggest that many people knew what was going on that I don't think one person can just say, oh, it was all me.
Yep.
The other thing that's particularly damning is discussions of building a Trump Tower in Moscow during the campaign place Trump surrogates and probably Donald Trump himself in these discussions and in these negotiations. And because Trump has said so many times that he's had no deals with Russia, that he doesn't know any Russians, he hasn't spoken to any Russians, that's now clearly not true, which means that a lot of other things that he said about the investigation might now be assumed to be patently false as well.
And are we expecting the president to be subpoenaed?
I think it's a last step.
Okay.
If I were a betting woman, I'd say that probably that it will come to that. Whether the president will allow for that or whether he would step down or try to squash the investigation is another question.
Okay, well, that's the Russian side of things. Let's talk about the person who lost, Hillary Clinton, in her book. What's the reaction to it been down there?
So first, I have to say it's 4:08 and mine still has not been delivered, and I paid for it to come extra early today, so it's going to be a long night for me. I think that there are two general narratives out there. The first is that it's the there are anecdotes and there are examples in the book where she would have been that person and sort of had that kind of personality and that willingness to sort of break from decorum during the campaign, she might have been more successful. And then the other side is that no, it's really still a pretty technocratic book, and it highlights all of the reasons that she lost the election and didn't resonate with the American people. So, next week at this time, I'll be able to give you my own view, but I think the views are mixed, and I also think they're highly partisan, right? Like, the people that like the book are not the people that you would be surprised would like the book. Similar to those who think that it's just not honest enough are those who probably didn't think she was honest enough.
Have you heard any sort of the rhetoric from especially the Bernie Sanders supporters? I've certainly seen it up here by some saying that they thought that there was a lot of finger pointing by Hillary, blaming Sanders for the role of the campaign.
So I have heard that. The question, though, is to what end? Bernie Sanders is not running again. Bernie Sanders achieved everything that he wanted. He has a leadership position. So I don't know what that kind of grumbling ultimately does, especially at a time when the Democratic Party is doing incredibly well. I mean, they're apparently the only party Donald Trump is willing to negotiate with. So I don't know if fracturing, revisiting the primary is the best way to go. Hillary Clinton, I think, had to talk about the primary and wanted to talk about the primary. I think the Sanders supporters should probably just let it go.
Speaking of Sanders supporters, natural segue here, Medicare for all. We're here, additional senators coming out. Is there any traction to this?
I think there is. I just read Joe Manchin, who is, pretty much as moderate a Democrat as you can get from West Virginia in the Senate, now says that he's open to the idea and he wants to see more about how it's worked and what the costs have been in other countries. I think we're at a point right now where the Democrats realize that they've been able to keep Obamacare from being raised. And as a result, because it still stands, they need to come up with a way to not only maintain it, but improve it. Because if the Republicans are not able to get rid of it, then the Democrats can sort of be the saviors and work to ameliorate the circumstances that people are on Obamacare find themselves in. So the fact that single payer is a possibility demonstrates how far to the left we've moved on healthcare. But I think also the very real incentives that Democrats have to come up with a specific plan.
Are you surprised to see this level of support where we are right now? If I'd asked you this question 2 months ago.
I am. I think part of the reason that we're seeing this now, though, is because the Republicans have systematically and on numerous occasions been unable to get rid of Obamacare, which suggests that it's here to stay. So now that it's here to stay, I think the Democrats are feeling a little bit more comfortable with being in a position to be the leaders of the tweaks and the reform efforts.
So let's tack to another policy issue here. Let's go over the Department of Education, Betsy DeVos, and her plans with Title IX. We've been seeing a lot of reaction to it here and nationally. What does this mean?
I mean, it's not that surprising given that over the course of the last couple of months, she's actually been meeting with men's rights groups. I think it ultimately underscores that this administration takes far less seriously sexual harassment, sexual discrimination on college campuses than the Obama administration did. I mean, what the Obama administration did was say that a preponderance of evidence was all that was needed. And by all that was needed, that is not a particularly low bar, given that victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment are reluctant to report in the first place. But they basically said that if there's a preponderance of evidence, an investigation can, take off. And what she's basically saying is that she's more interested in the rights of the accused than the victims themselves, and having due process as the reason. But that sort of overlooks the fact that there are systematic problems that make it unlikely for victims to report in the first place. And so it also, I think, demonstrates some degree of tone deafness between the administration and what's going on typical college campuses.
And you're the political scientist, but you're right there on campus. And so, what are the next steps with what she's been saying, what the administration can do? Is there a potential for major changes on college campuses across the country?
I mean, I think there's a potential for change, but it's important to keep in mind that the colleges and universities themselves have their own reporting guidelines and take into account how to deal with these things, right? They're not the only ones dealing with criminal investigations. There are informal complaint mechanisms that they can rely on as well. So, similar to the way that we've seen colleges and universities respond to DACA and other initiatives mentioned by the administration to try to quell any anxiety and make sure that people's lives aren't sort of thrown into a tizzy. I expect that this is another issue where the colleges and universities themselves will try to compensate for the lost protections that the administration pursues.
And finally, we couldn't end this call without talking about any talk down there about the Ted Cruz tweet. If folks didn't see, actually, he liked from his handle that he said it was a mistake by a staffer, a pornographic tweet. Do we think this was an honest mistake?
First of all, this is all anyone's talking about.
See, you get the real scoop from inside the Beltway. Where I'm asking about healthcare, I'm asking about Russia. It's all about the Ted Cruz tweet. The like, not the tweet, the like.
Right. So, I mean, I think that this highlights a couple of things. The first is that, so the Ted Cruz campaign says that it was a staffer who made a mistake. It'll be handled internally. There was nothing nefarious involved. And they're alluding to the fact that, the staffer didn't even mean to like the tweet. It was just that it got a little out of hand. This wouldn't be as big a deal, I think, if Ted Cruz wasn't a vocal opponent of pornography, if Ted Cruz didn't say things that would suggest that any person that even was looking at something like this on a screen was morally bankrupt. So, right, there's a hypocrisy component there. The second is, I think, it highlights that in this new age, it's not only about sending the email or posting on Facebook or sending a tweet that can be a problem. It's also the footprint associated with anything that you've liked or anything that you've retweeted or anything that you've, shared on Facebook as well. And so, for a long time, it was just, college interns or even high school students who handled candidates or elected officials' social media presence. And I think now, given that we're seeing things like this, it's going to be higher level communications people put in charge of that kind of, that kind of role.
Well, that raises the very question. I was just going to ask you that. I would think in this day and age that they would. It could have been an adult. It could have been a senior staffer in charge, and not sort of that 20-something staffer that we associate with the Hill. Do you ever think we'll find out who liked the tweet? Is there kind of Tweetgate? It's just the salaciousness of it and sort of a funky news time that folks are sort of fixating on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of like a happy sigh of relief that Irma is out of the way, right? This was kind of a good, a good distraction. I do think that it highlights the fact that, having 8 or 10 people have access to a candidate or elected official's Twitter feed and Twitter account is probably not the best idea, because at some point it's the candidate or the elected official who's accountable and who's responsible. So, one time might be a mistake. I would just caution everybody to remember that the whole Anthony Weiner saga began when he said that his account was hacked and one tweet was sent. So it's not to say that anything terrible has happened here, but it's still early in the saga.
And let's just finish up before I let you go about the social media, about the tweeting. So many times you see people, especially Facebook, Twitter, retweet what they said was a Donald Trump tweet. It's clearly not his tweet. Someone has taken the image and taken the text and sort of manipulated one, sort of the fake tweets. There's also Twitter accounts that look so similar to an actual elected official's account, but if an average person might see something, might reshare something, I mean, is this sort of the new fake news, if you will, or sort of even the more pervasive fake news, if people are able to create these fake tweets or, you know, push forth ones that aren't actually from the elected official, but there's one letter off? You know, should the public be more discerning?
Right. Well, I would say that this is the only fake news, right? What Donald Trump considers fake news is actual news. It's just news he doesn't like. This is fake. I wouldn't be surprised if we get to the point where either, you know, Twitter has what's called a verified account. I wouldn't be surprised if they wind up trying to figure out a way to convey more clearly that this is official versus not official, so that people that might not know what that check mark means are more attuned to what's going on. But, you know, again, it's one of those things where the candidates and elected officials know that this happens, and you take the good with the bad, and if at any point the negative consequences associated with somebody pretending to be you or creating a shadow account outweigh the benefits of how you can communicate with the press and your constituents, they'll stop using it.
I mean, it takes about, you know, 5-10 seconds to look and see if Trump actually tweeted something that you see people pushing around, liking, saying, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. So you go to the actual person's page and it's clearly not there. But there's just so much of the American public that just passes it off as fact.
That's right. But I'm not sure that that's actually new with social media. In fact, social media lets us now verify in a way that we were not able to 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. So, you know, I don't think it's a huge deal at this point. But again, if it becomes more of a problem and the liabilities outweigh the advantages, I guarantee you candidates and elected officials will just stop using it.
Interesting. Well, as always, Jennifer, appreciate picking your brain down there. I hope your book arrives. I hope your Hillary Clinton book, and you read through the night. And you know, I don't know if I can wait till next week to get your reaction to it. I'll probably hit you with an email and say, hey, what'd you think? But as always, appreciate picking your brain down there.
My pleasure.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thanks. Bye. Jennifer Lawless down at American University.